With mortgage rates rising over 7%, inflation still increasing, and rent prices increasing by like 30% over the last 4 years, it's getting harder and harder to afford housing in the United States. So if you're feeling the strain of housing, you're definitely not alone. What's up, y'all? I'm HelloEricYu, and a few years ago, I quit my tech job to focus on real estate and entrepreneurship. In this video today, I want to talk about my experience of living rent-free through house hacking. So let's get into it. All right, so first off, what even is house hacking? I think the easiest way to explain it is basically you buy a property, you buy a house, and it has multiple units or rooms that you can end up renting out, and then your renters cover your mortgage. So the way to think about it is you buy a property, you've got your mortgage. Let's say it's $2,000. In the case of, let's say like a duplex or a triplex, we've got 1 or 2 units. You have those other units rent for at least $2,000 so that your mortgage is covered and you get to live there rent-free. When you find the right deal and opportunity, and as long as you run your numbers right, there's a lot of house hacking opportunities out there. So it seems pretty straightforward, right? So I learned about the concept of house hacking back in 2019 when I went to my first real estate investor meetup in the Bay Area. The 2 people that were hosting it were Jenny Locke and Calvin Chin. They're fantastic real estate investors. So if you're in the Bay Area, you should definitely get to know them, and I'm happy to make an intro as well. Anyway, Jenny was talking about her experience house hacking while she was living on the property and she was renting out 2 other parts of it. I don't remember if she rented out rooms or units, but she was able to cover her mortgage and I believe then some. So not only was she living on the property and getting her mortgage covered, she was actually getting paid because her tenants were paying more rent than what her mortgage actually was. This really unlocked the power of real estate investing for me, and all of a sudden I was just like, wow, house hacking makes so much sense. I should totally look into it. But the problem is, living in the Bay Area, you're gonna be spending at least $1 million on a house, and for me at the time, that still seemed a little bit out of budget, a little bit too far away. I didn't want to risk and try something when I still didn't know if it would work, so I was feeling a little bit risk averse to trying. That all changed in 2020 when COVID hit, and all of a sudden we could all work remotely, right? So my girlfriend Wanda, now fiance, we decided to go on this life planning retreat where we're like, you know what, like now's the time to try something new. Why don't we test this out? So we decided on doing house hacking with Airbnb, and our kind of goal was to find a place within the next month or 2. So then our journey to find the property actually began. Our kind of goal with this whole process was to find markets where the mortgage would be less than the rent that we were paying in the Bay Area. So I was living in San Francisco at the time, and we were paying $2,850 for a 1-bed, 1-bath, 400 square foot place. Our kind of thinking was, as long as we're paying less than $2,800 or $2,850, then we'll be totally fine. Because even if our house hack renters or Airbnb guests didn't pay us any money, we'd still be paying less for our total cost of living. So it seemed like kind of a risk-free way to test things out. And the budget that we landed on was any kind of property that was less than $500,000. So now that we had our budget figured out, we went to the next step of actually finding cities where this might make sense. We looked at places like Sacramento, looked at Palm Springs, Redding, California, Santa Rosa, and a bunch of places all in about California where if for whatever reason we had to go back because offices reopened after COVID ended, it wouldn't be that hard of a transition back into town. After doing analysis for a while, we landed on Redding, California as our destination. If you want to learn more about the process of figuring out the numbers and actually finding a property, stay tuned because I'm going to make another video about that goes into depth on the whole process. So anyway, we landed on Redding, and because interest rates were less than 3% at the time, it gave us a lot of options in the market. Most of the properties we were looking at were around that $350 to $450K mark, so we had our option to pick from. After spending about a month on the search in total, we finally found our first house hack property. It was a $429,000 house. It had a 4-bed, 2-bath main house, and then a tiny little 252 square foot guest house that we ended up living out of. So the numbers break down as such. The purchase price was $429,000. We did a 5% down payment, which was $21,450. We negotiated with the sellers to pay for our loan closing costs, so that was $0. And then finally, our monthly mortgage came out to $2,457.78 a month. That's $2,457.78. Now, you might be asking, why did I put 5% down? So one of the big things I wanted to make sure was, because this is our first time trying out a project, I wanted to put as low down as possible just to minimize my own risk. In case things didn't work out, I didn't want to have sunk all my cash into a project. Now, there's some pretty crazy programs out there these days where you can actually do 0% down on a property as well. So if you're looking to get started in house hacking, check out some of those first-time home buyer incentives. There's some really good ones, and I can talk about some of those in depth in another video as well. Oh, and one other thing. If you think that $429,000 is a lot to put down for a home purchase, I totally hear ya, and that's why there's other markets out there out in the Midwest where you can buy properties for around $100 to $150K or so. That means if we're looking at like a 5% down payment, you'd need about like $5,000 to $10,000 and then whatever your closing costs are. Or if you're like me, you can have your closing costs covered by the seller so that you can bring less cash to the table. So if you do want to get started with house hacking, but you think it's unaffordable, please reach out and I'm happy to walk through your scenario. Okay, so now that we had the property under hand, it came time to actually set up the property. The way that we were going to structure it is Wanda and I were going to live in the 252 square foot guest house, and then we would furnish and get the main house ready for Airbnb. So this was our first time tackling any kind of house project. We had to do things like swap out faucets, did paint for the first time, built a ton of furniture, and realized that I think the most exhausting part of setting up an Airbnb is flattening the boxes and getting rid of them afterward. So anyway, we did all of that stuff, just the two of us, for about a month, and by the end of it, like, hands were calloused and cracking, and it was just so ready, and it was so time to get the property actually launched on Airbnb. So here are some photos of what the property looked like before, and here are some of the photos afterward. We really prioritized making that there were accent walls and the property would jump out, because I think one of the most important pieces is while you're marketing your property online, you want to make sure it stands out compared to all the other listings. So we did a bunch of these accent walls to really jump off the screen. All right, so after that month of work, getting everything set up, we finally launched our Airbnb, and the crazy thing is within the first 30 minutes of launching on Airbnb, we got 2 bookings that covered the entire mortgage. No joke. We got one booking for, I need to look up the exact numbers, but it was like $1,400, and then the other for $1,200. Screenshots below of whatever's the more accurate number. Our mortgage was covered entirely. I was freaking out. You know, I ran to Wanda. I was like, oh my God, this whole Airbnb thing totally works. We should double down. We should do more. And Wanda was like, whoa, hold up, Eric, hold up. Did we price too low? And she was totally right. We priced the property way too low. There was no reason for us to be booked that quickly after launch. And we realized, or at least I realized, that it was time to bump up the pricing to really optimize for revenue. So yes, I was super ecstatic, but then at the same time, it was a missed opportunity for revenue because we probably could have priced like 20, 30% higher and still gotten booked. So anyway, after getting the mortgage covered in the first 30 minutes, I was like, wait a second, I can totally see why people house hack and how they profit. So not only we cover our mortgage in the first month, we actually did way more than the mortgage. So very first month, we had 73% occupancy on a total gross revenue of $5,500. After subtracting out all the expenses, so things like mortgage, utilities, cleanings, taxes, we were still left with $2,400 of cash flow. Let that sink in for a second. We were living out of the guest house and we got paid $2,400 to be there. Now you might be asking, is it still possible to house hack in 2024? And that's a great question. We'll talk about it more in depth in another video, but the short answer is yes. There's always opportunities out there, and it comes down to how well you know your numbers and how well you run your numbers in addition to what you're willing to do on the property. For something like what we picked up in Reading, it's harder to find these kinds of more turnkey type properties that you can get in right away and rent and cover your mortgage and then some. But I have some coaching clients who were able to do the same thing last year at these high 7 to almost 8% interest rates. So it is very much still possible, but you have to be a little bit more specific and you have to be a little bit more careful with your criteria as you're analyzing properties. All right, so all in all, after this first experience, I became convinced that real estate investing was the way to go. At this time, I was still working my job. So stay tuned to hear more about on how I scaled up after this first property, and I was able to get to a spot where I had enough cash flow to quit my job and then focus on real estate investing full time. If this content was interesting to you, I'm HelloEricYu. Drop me a follow, drop a comment for any questions that you might have about this whole process. I'm more than happy to help, and I will see you all next time. Thanks so much.